Good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of the Green Hydrogen Summit. Today's focus is primarily on the co-location of electrolysis with renewable power, so wind and solar primarily. But we also have some other great sessions following on from our policy day yesterday. So you will have remembered the session from South Australia yesterday. We now have a more general, wider panel on Australia and the hydrogen policies there, which will be able to dig a little bit deeper into some of the national policies as well as the topics covered by South Australia. So it is my great pleasure to introduce the host for the session, Sarah Brown, who's joining me on screen now. Hi, Sarah. How you doing?
Hi, George. Thank you. Lovely to meet you.
And you. So I'm going to pass straight over to you and you can introduce our panelists for the session. If there are any questions, as always, please post them into the chat throughout the panel and Sarah will raise them up to the panelists. So thanks very much, Sarah. Over to you.
Thank you. So I'll just start by introducing the lovely people in the panel. Dr. Patrick Hartley, leader of the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, or CSIRO as we like to call them, Hydrogen Industry Mission, and Dr. Fiona Simon, the CEO of the Australian Hydrogen Council. And myself, I'm the Australian Government's Department of Industry, Science and Energy and Resources Counsellor for Europe. And of course, hydrogen is a thing that's close to my heart from my previous role as Chief of Staff to Dr. Alan Finkel, a key person involved in this hydrogen discussion within Australia. So I'm going to give our panelists the time to kind of introduce themselves and their kind of focus around hydrogen as part of this session, an analysis of the hydrogen market in Australia. But in my role as kind of an Australian government rep, I wanted to give you the kind of Australian government overview of the support it's providing to this important industry. So to give you the little quick background, Australia released its National Hydrogen Strategy in November 2019 to provide a framework for Australian governments and industry to work together to build a hydrogen industry. The strategy includes 57 nationally coordinated government actions for industry development. Actions are themed around national coordination, developing production capacity supported by local demand, responsive regulation, international engagement, innovation, research and development, skills and workforce development, and earning community confidence, a really important part of this conversation. In September 2020, the Australian government announced a $1.9 billion package to invest in low emission technologies, including hydrogen. Hydrogen is a priority technology under the government's technology investment roadmap. By driving down the costs associated with producing hydrogen, industry will be closer to achieving the government's goal of getting the costs down to under $2 per kilogram. We see that hydrogen at or under $2 per kilogram is the point where it becomes competitive with alternatives in large-scale deployment across our energy systems. Just yesterday, in the budget, the Australian government announced an additional $275 million to accelerate the development of an Australian hydrogen industry. This new funding brings the Australian government's total support for a hydrogen industry to over $900 million. Australia's strategy sets out a pathway over 2 phases for industry growth that will help realise our potential as a net hydrogen exporter. In the first phase, which is already underway, our objectives are to advance priority pilots, trials and demonstration projects, create, test and prove Australia's clean hydrogen supply chains, and develop capability for rapid industry scale-up. A key feature of this scaled up approach will be creating hydrogen hubs, regions where users of hydrogen are co-located in metropolitan, regional and remote areas. Analysts have identified that the development of hubs are a cost-effective route to achieving scale, offering advantages including making infrastructure more economic, allowing for efficiencies from scale, fostering innovation, facilitating the sharing expertise and services, and promoting sector coupling. Sector coupling in particular can provide additional value streams for hydrogen projects and other sectors. Intelligent linking of the export, electricity, gas and transport markets can create economies of scale and bring hydrogen costs down. As part of its support for hydrogen hubs, the Australian government recently awarded more than $100 million in conditional funding through the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, or ARENA, renewable hydrogen deployment funding round for 3 large-scale hydrogen plants that will be among the biggest in the world. Engie's project will see renewable hydrogen used to produce ammonia for export in the Pilbara, while the ATCO and AGIG projects will use renewable energy to produce hydrogen for gas blending into existing natural gas pipelines. The new funding announced yesterday, well, announced earlier on, but consolidated yesterday in the budget, will support up to 4 additional regional hydrogen hubs and up to 10 hydrogen hub feasibility studies. The package also provides support for the development and implementation of trials of a guarantee of origin hydrogen emissions certification scheme, an essential part of developing a global market, what we're talking about today, one of the aspects of what we're talking about today. In addition to these measures, the budget included $560 million for international technology partnerships and initiatives, bringing further benefit to the hydrogen industry. And so with that kind of overarching view of the Australian government's thing, I'd like to throw to Dr. Patrick Hartley for his kind of views on how we get a hydrogen market and the potential for the Australian industry.
Well, thanks very much, Sarah. I might just start by giving just a bit of an introduction about where I and my organisation fit into the Australian hydrogen industry development scene. As Sarah mentioned, I lead the hydrogen industry mission at the CSIRO, which is the National Research Agency here in Australia. And really the mission's role, which is it's a relatively recent initiative, building on a lot of experience, of course, in hydrogen development in Australia. The role of the mission is to provide that trusted scientific advice and technological advice to government and industry. And that includes delivering studies like the National Hydrogen Roadmap, which we delivered back in 2018. And also, of course, we play a role in developing the new technologies and demonstration projects, primarily in partnership with industry, which enable the development of the hydrogen sector through learning by doing and understanding how the technology really comes together to make it investable. So that's the role of CSIRO. We're very actively now building our mission portfolio in these spaces. I might just maybe leave it there in terms of introductions, and then I think probably we can delve more into the industry development in Australia together in the actual Q&A session that comes up.
Thanks, Patrick. Much appreciated. So now I'll ask Dr. Fiona Simon to give a view of the work of her organisation and her role in it.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And it's a pleasure to be here as well. So I'm the CEO of the Australian Hydrogen Council, and we're the peak industry body for the emerging clean hydrogen industry in Australia. Our objective is to grow the industry to have clean hydrogen as a key part of the energy mix. So our members are companies. They're spread across all of the sectors that hydrogen, for which hydrogen is relevant. The main areas are energy, transport, technology and consulting. Hydrogen is very versatile, and that versatility is represented in that diversity of our membership. So we've been growing quite quickly. We were around since 2017, but we pretty much doubled our membership in the last 18 months or so, because hydrogen has become an immensely popular topic across industry and government and academia in Australia. In terms of what we do, we really focus on the policy side of things. So we're working as sort of the trusted advisor from the industry perspective to try to get the right policy settings so that we can close the economic gap and get an economic license to operate, so that we can get the right regulatory settings and have a regulatory license to operate, and also so that we can have the right conversations at the right time with the right people across consumers and communities in Australia, so that we really are making sure that we have a social license to operate as the industry emerges and grows and gets to scale. So yes, I might stop there as well, and very happy to looking forward to the conversation that we have together.
Thank you so much, Fiona. So I guess, the big thing that everyone's kind of listening into for this session for is to get insights into Australia's hydrogen strategy and what we're kind of putting in place. So what do you kind of see as the key things and why Australia is a good place to start a hydrogen industry? I might start with Patrick.
Sure, can do. Yeah. Okay, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think it's fairly simple for Australia. We, of course, have this enormous landmass. some of the greatest renewable energy resource in the world, and a low population, which means that our indigenous requirement for energy is lower than many other countries. And so, of course, we have the potential, if we can harness it, to actually export that energy in some form. And hydrogen is, of course, a really suitable form for clean energy transportation around the world. A lot of work to do in that, but that's the end prize, I guess, of the hydrogen journey in Australia. I think most of us in Australia would agree that establishing a domestic industry as a stepping stone to that export industry is very, very important, because we need to scale up in every possible way, including building demand through domestic pathways. And so we very much see investment in the domestic industry as a key set of steps towards the development of that export industry as the long-term goal.
Thanks, Patrick. Apologies. So, Fiona, what's your thoughts on, why Australia for hydrogen, and about our strategy to develop that industry?
Well, thank you. Well, yes, certainly supporting what Patrick said. We have the land mass, we have the solar penetration to create, particularly to create green hydrogen at scale. But we've also got the experience across the oil and gas export and in renewable energy. We have the intellectual resources. We've got a comprehensive hydrogen research program. We're seeing that develop across the country. And we've also got strong economic growth, and we're a safe and low risk environment to invest and do business with really positive global relationships. And I think that will stand Australia in good stead, despite the distance in some cases, with our relationships. And I would say that even entities that didn't think they would be importing hydrogen from Australia, I think are looking to Australia to export their technology and their intellectual contributions as well. So I think Australia it's ours to lose, to be honest, to be really the powerhouse for hydrogen in our region. And then that's within a once in a generation opportunity overall for hydrogen within that broader moving to net zero, energy transition that we're all part of. So yeah, Australia can absolutely be very much, at least in our region, a powerhouse, but I think globally one to watch.
Thanks, Fiona. So I think, one of the things that we've been asked to kind of reflect on in this panel is how major players are approaching the challenge, including government and private finance, developer and technology providers. And we've touched on that a bit in the responses so far, but is there anything you kind of think more about, like how are the finance in particular, or, major companies seeing the opportunities in Australia and the challenge of, getting this new industry up off the ground? I might start with you this time, Fiona, mix it up.
Thank you. I think what we hear from our members, and really we have conversations with everyone outside our membership as well, sort of across all those different uses for hydrogen, because there's all that interest, is really looking for that next step, I think, past the National Hydrogen Strategy and the Low Emissions Technology Statement. And I think sort of pulling together all those wonderful announcements and the funding and everything, so that we're all sort of pulling in sort of the one direction. And the hubs are a very good start there as well. It really makes sense to try to get those efficiencies and co-locate as much as possible. So for us, like at the end of the day, though, it's actually going to be moving to net zero full stop is not going to be cheap. It's the thing we all need to do globally. And hydrogen within that, we are still probably billions of dollars off where we need to be if we're going to get to scale. And industry doesn't tend to create itself at a loss. So right now the industry is super keen, but I think what we're still looking for is even, and I know it sounds grasping given announcements in the last weeks and the budget in the last day, but yeah, the next stage again is saying, all right, so in which direction are we pulling, and what are the milestones to get there? And so industry is really looking for that plan and the policy settings that help us get there as well. because that's such an important way of closing an investment gap. It's adjusting tax settings. It's putting in ways of valuing carbon and making hydrogen appealing compared to the alternatives. So they're the sorts of things that we're looking for as a way to take that next step again toward getting that industry to perceive less risk, get some bankable targets, and close that investment gap.
Great, thanks, Fiona. And Patrick, what do you think? Like, what are your conversations with various people telling you about the attitude towards developing a hydrogen industry in Australia?
Yeah, look, I think it's a really interesting question, and I really agree with what Fiona said. I mean, I think it's valuable to look at where we're at right now, and I think where we're at right now is we're just sort of coming to the end of that demonstration phase. Like, the demonstration phase of industry development is really important. Because it gets some of the infrastructure built, it gets people getting experience and understanding of the costs and just how you deploy this technology. But now it really is, okay, what's the leap of faith? What's the tipping point that gets you to scale? Because that's where it has to go, and because capturing those economies of scale is obviously really critical in this industry in particular, where the costs are high at the moment. And so really enabling those learning curves that bring those costs down by getting to scale is critical. Yeah, so some of the announcements you announced, that, I mean, you can see that we're moving from 1 megawatts type electrolyzers to 10 megawatt type electrolyzers now. I think that's the right sort of thing to do. But clearly, if you're going to be producing hydrogen at scale, and again, it comes back to this domestic and export discussion, we're going to have significant growth in demand for that hydrogen through multiple industries to really build that production even higher to get to those real economies of scale. And so yes, we would say scale up is critical to narrow that cost gap, to get the cost of hydrogen so it's approaching competitiveness with the incumbent applications or the incumbent energy sources in those applications. And we're seeing companies co-investing with government, big companies with very deep pockets for capital projects, clearly taking an interest in Australia. And so that's extremely encouraging, but it is going to take a long time, and it's going to take patient capital, I think. So I think we have to be realistic about this. It's not just a click your fingers, it's going to happen sort of journey.
So reflecting on that, the next thing is, how will Australia scale up, this hydrogen production? Like, I know both of you have given some kind of thoughts about that, but, let's try and dive a little deeper. Like, what do you think, we would need to see? What kind of scale do you think we can get to? Like what's kind of needed? And of course, one of the things that's part of this is, how do we get it right so it actually forms a market and we can do things. So, your thoughts on how we can actually do that next phase and scale up. I'll start with you now, Patrick.
Sure. Yes. Well, this is a difficult one, but I think you have to start really by realizing that we talk about a hydrogen industry. We do that for a reason, obviously, but there's really the hydrogen industry is actually a combination of different industries, right? Depending on where you're looking. So in Australia, as in many other places in the world, we have a lot of interest actually in injecting gas into our gas distribution networks. That makes a lot of sense because you have an infrastructure there which is already existing that you can get fairly substantial quantities of hydrogen into without a huge amount of asset investment, at least in the early stages, at certain percentages. And so you're seeing a number of gas network companies in Australia investing in typically introducing 10% hydrogen into their networks. And by the time you add up the volume of those gas networks, if you were to do that across the entire gas network, that's a pretty big step in offtake. So that makes a lot of sense. The economics in that particular situation are quite tough because you're displacing effectively a fuel that's relatively speaking at least a lower cost fuel. So there's work to be done there on how you actually incentivize that, I guess, at a very large scale. And I won't go through every sector, but of course you've then got the vehicle sector. We have in Australia in particular, a very dispersed population. We have long distance travel, heavy freight travel, which is largely road based. that needs to be decarbonised. You know, the use of diesel in Australia is huge, and so a big contributor to our greenhouse gas emissions. So heavy transport in particular is a key opportunity for Australia. So I think you know, that's probably, you know, I think most people would say that's one of the nearer term opportunities for hydrogen, because it's displacing more expensive fuels. And then industry offtake, though. I mean, I guess because of the capital investment that's required to really build large scale industries around hydrogen, I think that's probably a lot, you know, not a lot longer, but a bit longer term in terms of what needs to be done. But we have to start now, because those investments take a long time to really decide and land. So I think you're going to see these, you know, the different sectors are going to move at different speeds and come online at scale at different times. And that comes back to that question that Fiona raised about, you know, what are the milestones for this industry? What happens when? That's where we're all focusing our thinking at the moment.
Thank you, Patrick. And what about you, Fiona? What do you see that we need to do to scale up our production and our industry?
Oh, I don't want to just repeat everything Patrick said. So let's just say I agree with what Patrick said. Look, for us, a lot of the challenge with the industry, as I found, or with just, it's not with the industry, but with, you know, addressing the idea of how we get to scale and what is scale, how do we get there, is that we actually don't know the answers, and that's okay. But it does make planning more difficult. So I realise I'm asking for planning whilst at the same time thinking, but it could be done in a number of ways. There's so much that's possible, and it doesn't mean that everything will happen or that it'll all happen at once. But I think, I think we don't quite know what scale means because of the variables involved. So what we do know is that it's sort of significant amounts of hydrogen. So Deloitte did some work for the National Hydrogen Strategy, which I know, well, both you and Sarah and Patrick do know that. And then so the best that I've got is access, you know, have a look at those Deloitte numbers. But they were scenarios, not predictions, and it wasn't about saying this is what scale actually is. But as we looked at the sorts of the kilotons and the megatons of hydrogen, I think it was 1.8 megatons by 2030 for one of the more ambitious cases. That's then meaning that we're going to need to have, you know, at least a couple of gigawatt electrolyzers. And so, you know, we worked that back and said, well, what kind of mix of projects could that mean? And then how many dollars is that likely to be? But again, you're making a whole lot of assumptions. And then working back from that, how long does that take? And I think for us, I think what we know is it's big. It's going to be big, and big takes time. And so if you look at, say, mega projects can take, you know, 7 or 8 years to get up. And that's once you've done the first couple of years of engineering design. So then you think, well, if we're going to be in this position by 2030, what do we need to have known now? And so that for me is the challenge. It's just looking even at, as I said, I obviously this is about hydrogen, but if we're looking at the capacity to move to renewable electricity in Australia full stop, it's many multiples of what we currently have as our whole electricity grid. So it's a much bigger question, and then hydrogen sits within that, which is why I think planning is so important. And getting to scale means that we've cracked that question, even if it's done in sort of increments or by, you know, a cumulative effect. We've cracked the question of having enough of the right electricity at the right point in the right place. We've cracked the question of where are we storing our hydrogen, because that's one of the things which is still sort of a bit unclear to me. And obviously, and so much of that though is driven by the demand, as Patrick was saying. So those are really big, important questions, but the more that we can actually get the right settings in place now so that that demand can start to draw through the innovation and draw through the investment, that's kind of the way to go. And maybe it's more about looking at the projects and trying to draw through that demand than crystal ball gazing. And I say that as if I'm being citizen critical of it. I've spent the last 2 years trying to see into the future, and I'm just realizing now, or I've come to the conclusion that everything's possible, and we actually need to probably tackle it from a different angle in order to get somewhere. It's just progress over perfection, I think, at this stage.
Thank you, Fiona. I agree completely. It is really challenging with these things. So I guess the next kind of area is, the thought about, is a global hydrogen market possible? Do you think we will get to the point of a global market, or will it be more about kind of domestic use? That's still an open question for a lot of people. What's your thoughts on that? So I might start with you, Fiona.
Again, I sort of talk to different people who have, for each party, and they're all bright, the answer is screamingly obvious, but everyone has different views. My view, from having sort of observed it all and asked lots of questions, is that we need domestic in Australia. However, we don't right now, and my apologies to both of you, given who you work for, but we don't right now have the policy environment to support us looking at hydrogen through the lens of climate change. We don't currently have those policy settings. So it's then more about the pure economics of it. And as other countries are looking to decarbonise and are seeing the seriousness of their situations, because they don't have the landmass that we have, they don't have the same opportunities to create their energy in the future. Their interest in Australia, and that's both countries that are distant and close. I think that I think that export interest is going to help establish our domestic, because the export interest is going to be the thing that well, it already is. That's making everyone in Australia go, wow, how big is this opportunity? It's big, let's engage. And so I agree with Patrick that, you don't just create an export market out of nowhere. You need the offtake to get to that scale, and domestic is the way of doing it. But I think in turn, it's the export market that's driving how we develop everything domestically. It's the export market that's bringing the dollars into the country, that's pushing our policy a bit harder, and that that domestic market then will enable us to be the export superpower that we can be.
Thanks, Fiona. And you, Patrick, what do you think? Do you think a global hydrogen market is possible?
I think it's certainly possible. I mean, I think I'll look overseas for the answer, I guess. I mean, everything Fiona says domestically for building that export market is absolutely true. But if we're going to build an export market, we need off-takers for that. That's for sure. And we have very positive signals from our region in particular and elsewhere now. We're hearing Germany talk about it. We're hearing, we've already in our region spoken a lot about Japan and Korea, for instance, as off-takers for Australian hydrogen. And like I say, the signals are very positive around that, and the targets that they're setting for those sorts of things are very positive. And all we need to see is the offtake agreement, and we'll know it's really bankable at that point, I think. So it is going to be a team effort, and we are going to need to do this. We're going to need investment certainty at both ends of the value chain to make that happen. But I think the commitments are real, and if the investments follow the commitments, then I think then it's certainly doable. And it may not be an all at once a global clean energy, trading at scale across the globe. It might be just individual supply chains working themselves up into scale that way. So it's certainly possible, and you'll be scaling in a way that makes sense.
So actually a question in the chat kind of follows on nicely from that, and I encourage anyone who wants to raise a question for our panelists to do so in the chat. So the question is, who are the main off-takers of hydrogen in Australia today, and how will this change in the future? And of course, I think, we've kind of answered that question already, but, like any kind of further reflections on that, Patrick?
Yeah, I think, it's who are the current off-takers, who are the current people driving the discussion. I mentioned our gas networks companies, and many of the demonstration projects that have been funded both recently and previously have been in that gas networks area. I think what's interesting is when we did our national hydrogen roadmap back in 2018, we foresaw transport, and heavy transport in particular, as being a key early stage demand builder. Now, do we have a heavy transport project in Australia right now? No, we don't. Nothing's been built, and that's going to come, I think. But that's probably shows you that it doesn't necessarily follow the sequence that you expect for build up. So I would see heavy transport is the big opportunity. Gas networks is kind of happening, and still needs a lot of help, but it's happening. And then industrial offtake. I mean, you've got companies looking at ammonia production right now in some of those projects, those larger scale projects you mentioned, Sarah. So we've got quite a lot of engagement across all of these different value chains. Yeah, it's a complicated answer, I guess. There's multiple industries, really, as I said.
Yeah, Fiona, your thoughts?
Oh, I'm sorry to be so dull, but I'm just basically going to agree. Yeah, it's the same. What Patrick said is right. And I guess look at everything. Everything depends on the lens through which you are choosing to view it. So if we start with the perspective of where is hydrogen going to be vital, so actually that's something that's actually I might raise that. Sometimes people portray the question of hydrogen as an alternative to batteries, and then why would you do it? It's sort of seen as being this thing that you either believe in or you don't. And I would suggest that's not the right way to look at it, and that's not how we're looking at it. We're basically saying that the future, so the decarbonised future, is all about renewable electricity, and it involves batteries and bioenergy and pumped hydro and other bits and pieces, and hydrogen. And hydrogen has this fundamental role in supporting all of that because of the characteristics that it has that some of the others don't have. Much like there are that we use renewable electricity as the first option for a lot of things because it's more efficient, and batteries for sort of smaller scale things because that's more efficient. The benefits of using hydrogen are that you can decarbonise maritime, you can decarbonise aviation. You are looking at that, and so this is just what Patrick said. It's those areas where hydrogen really comes into its own. Now, that's not to say that hydrogen's only valid there, but I think once you've cracked, once you've done that, then at least you've sort of prepared and supported your economy to know that you've got long-term energy storage, for example, for when there might be renewable electricity droughts, where batteries don't get you there, where you need seasonal storage. That's where hydrogen comes into its own, and it does it at scale, unlike some of the other pieces which are great but don't necessarily operate at that same level. None of this comes without a cost, but it is how we decarbonise, the globe. But that's not to say, as I said, that that's all that hydrogen does. There's going to be constant sort of real life experimenting and understanding of, for a particular use, that where it could be a battery or it could be hydrogen, which is the better thing for that bus route, for that truck, for that logistics run, because it was possibly just that little bit further than batteries would get you, or you lost that little bit more payload than you could really get, and that's where hydrogen was the answer. And they're the sorts of areas that I think we'll discover as we go. But right now, it's hard to say it's going to be all small vans, or it won't be any small vans, or any of those things. And we sort of start with the really big stuff and know, well, we know that's necessary. Sort of the remote area power system, that's necessary. Can I just throw out there, I'd like to see defence run with this, because you'd think that defence and any one of the countries that might be dialing into this event will ideally be thinking less about, do the dollars stack up, and more about energy security, economic security. And so these are the sorts of areas where I'd like to think that, all of us, we could start to pay more attention to the ultimate goal, which is a future without us being reliant on hydrocarbons. And then say, all right, and what does it take to reach that goal? And let's just commit to it and let's just do it.
Thank you. Brilliant. So I guess one of the questions that gets asked a lot is, if we end up exporting hydrogen, will it be hydrogen or will it be as ammonia? And will we actually be exporting to Europe? We've got a European audience here, isn't Australia a long way away and isn't really competitive in terms when you add in those shipping costs? So, really interested to your kind of views of that, because I think it's a question that comes up a lot. And again, I encourage people to kind of put their questions in the chat so I can put them to the panelists. Fiona, start with you.
So that was the ammonia or something else question.
Ammonia or hydrogen, and the idea of, are we too far? Sorry, double-barreled question. I'm doing a Laura Temple.
I think, as with everything, the answer continues to be we don't know and it depends. But if I sort of go beyond that slightly, certainly ammonia is what many people are talking about as being a sort of a logical way of transporting hydrogen, because we know how to do that already. There are, however, conversion costs and efficiencies lost. So the question is then how, for that particular route, for that particular end use, what was in fact the most economic and way of doing that. And that may not always be ammonia, I don't know. But there's other technologies, there's other things that people are talking about. We've got a member who they're talking about how they've sort of cracked the nut of a full supply chain with compressed hydrogen in ships. So I'm not here to sort of pick winners. I went to an academic event some weeks ago where they were able to transport hydrogen as a powder. I'm sure Patrick would know about that and could talk about it. I'm not a technical person, so I don't know. The point is there's so much R&D going on in this space. I think the more certain someone is that we know absolutely what the answer to some of these questions are, the more I sort of think, ooh, I think we need to keep our minds open to all of the options as they evolve. And the second question was, is it too far?
Yeah.
I think we all thought it might have been a year or two ago, but with enough effort and enough time spent, I think increasingly there's data that goes to show that maybe if you've managed some of the big questions like how you're converting things, what sort of ship you have, then maybe those extra that extra distance doesn't make as much of a difference. But I'm not in a position to really answer that. But we're exploring these things about what's too far. And then I guess the other thing is that even if something's considered to be expensive because we're too far away, Australia has the benefits that other places might not have in helping support that diversity, in the safe trading relationships, and in that quid pro quo with an importing country where we might import something of theirs. So, the Germans, for example, want to export their technology. Australia's a prime position in the region. We could be in a good position to import their technology. So that might sweeten the deal. These are some of the things that I think start to chip away at the but it's too far argument.
Thanks, Fiona. I don't know if you wanted to add anything there, Patrick, or has Fiona kind of covered it well?
Oh, look, I'll just add, I guess, I think just in terms of how will we move it, I think that, it's not a competition. I think that's what Fiona was getting at, really. It's not a competition. There will be horses for courses, and there will be places where you want to use hydrides, like the powder you were talking about, Fiona. There will be places where you want to get pure hydrogen at scale, and that might be liquid hydrogen. There will be places where you want to use ammonia, maybe in direct combustion in power stations, for instance, where that makes sense. So I think you're going to see these different value chains all working, and liquid organic carriers is the one that often gets sort of left off the list. But that's going to have a place too, I think, particularly when it comes to sort of distribution in country. Liquid organic carriers can make quite a bit of sense. So and there will be more. I mean, this is the toughest nut to crack, really, in my view. If Sarah, you were to ask me, where are the R&D opportunities in hydrogen, I would say it's in storing and moving it, and getting the costs of that down and the scale of it up. I think is probably where the real innovation is both needed and going to come.
Great. And so I guess one of the things that came up in the announcements is Australia's work on a certificate of origin scheme. And I was just kind of wondering on your reflections on how necessary that is for the development of a global market, and, what are the key things you'd like to see in such a scheme being internationally agreed? Because, of course, the Europeans are working on things as part of their Fit for 55 package. There's a lot of work internationally, including through IPHE. What are your thoughts on the work around certificate of origin? Patrick? Sure.
Yeah, look, it's extremely important, right? Because without a certificate of origin, without some sort of I guess thresholds that you're working with, then it's going to be very tough to allow clean hydrogen or green hydrogen to compete with grey hydrogen, because grey hydrogen is going to be cheaper. So we have to have that, and I think the really important part of this, the certification story, that I think in Australia it's being, we're not working on it directly, but the government certainly is in trying to decide what those thresholds should be, so that you can give consumers choice, so that you don't lock people out of the use of hydrogen just because they can't afford that green premium. But you do want it to be as clean as you possibly can. How clean does it have to be before it can fit my application, I think is a really important question, and you need to give people that flexibility so that they perhaps can offset their emissions in other ways, but still be moving towards that clean hydrogen story. And I think that's the important part. It's about giving people the road to drive along, in a sense, and making sure that they're not stopped at different points along the way by having to get to the goal immediately.
And Fiona, further thoughts on that?
I don't know if they're further, but certainly certification is vital, and it's something which we've been hearing over the last couple of years. And we've been really pleased to see that while the Australian government hasn't really been blowing its trumpet on this, that there has been this work with the IPHE. So for those who may not be aware, it's International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in the Economy. Australia is one of either 22 or 23 countries, and Australia's been taking the lead in some of the work streams. And this is very much about developing, a carbon accounting methodology that is common. And it's so important. And so we've got a lot of trading partners involved in this. And as to what you then sort of tack on to that as a certification scheme might be a bit more up for grabs, but as long as at the end, we have a clear sort of translation service or currency conversion so that that customer of whomever is producing the hydrogen knows exactly what they're getting, it is vital. So yeah, we've been really pleased to see that the Australian government's been engaging really well, and there's a paper due out soon. And for us, we do have views about how it should progress, and we've been engaging with the government on that. And I think it's going down the sort of these logical paths, where it's probably not about the colours of the hydrogen. It's the carbon emissions. It's understanding the travel that the hydrogen did to get to its end product, and we're also talking about being scope 1 and scope 2 at this stage, not necessarily scope 3. So yeah, so we're hugely supportive and just want to see the paper come out and engage further with it. And we're really, we're pleased to see that it has been prioritised, because yeah, it's understanding what the customers want to buy in a market that still, doesn't exist yet and is developing is everything.
So I guess, with this international forum and audience, one of the things I'm very interested in is what role we think international collaboration will play. What partnerships do we need? What do we need to see from the various levels in terms of government and private investors and industry, and that in terms of, working together to get this to be a reality. So, very interested in your views in terms of that international collaboration piece. Fiona?
Again, well, that's everything too. Collaboration is everything. It's a challenge because there's also a lot of competition, and that's understandable as well. When everyone's talking about the opportunities, well, it's like, well, it's a closed system. There's only so many opportunities. So we've even got that within Australia. We've got our states and territories, all, many of them vying to be the export leader for Australia. So it is a challenge to get the collaboration that we all know is also relevant. But this is a very, very big jigsaw that we have. It's a 2,000 piece jigsaw, and we're all holding a few pieces. And it's really quite vital that we're able to engage with one another across boundaries, whether it's geographic boundaries or sector boundaries, temporal boundaries. We need to be thinking about what we want in the future, not just what we want now. And as Patrick said, being patient. So it's that urgent patience that I think it's that planning and those milestones, but also knowing that you're not going to get to that end goal, next year, but knowing that if you reach this milestone, you're that much closer, and it's that sort of sense of urgency that we need. So I think the collaboration is everything, because so many of us are trying to grapple with exactly the same things. So it is, how do you talk to communities? How do you think about, well, certainly the R&D side of things. It's not like physics is different from one country to the next in any radical way. And so and I think even from that trade perspective, like we're talking to our counterparts from other countries, and it's an enormously rewarding piece. And so I think it is everything, but it has all sorts of different ways that it manifests. It's in sharing risk, it's in sharing information, it's in helping cement relationships that I think, even if the payoff isn't right now, it's something which we're really investing in the future.
Thank you. I agree completely. Patrick, what do you think? You know, like I know, of course, CSIRO is an organisation that is all about collaboration. So I don't expect you to say, no, I don't think we need to be there, but, you know, any particular insights?
Yeah, look, I think, I thought Fiona was going to steal my thunder there for a minute because she mentioned R&D collaboration, but and that's absolutely right. I mean, it's not just my organisation; it's every research organisation anywhere in the world is essentially founded on collaboration. Because if you would want to advance a field, and we ought to, in a way, we're talking about advancing a field. You have to leverage everybody's experience. Otherwise, it's gonna you just slow things down immeasurably. And so, the value of R&D collaboration is well known to people who work in R&D, and the same rules apply here. If you want to move faster, you have to learn from each other and work together to do things. To take the best practice and spread it around as fast as you possibly can. And that's exactly what's going to happen here. And we're actually looking at playing a role in helping Australia do that from the research perspective as well. So hopefully we'll have some news to tell on that front sometime soon.
Brilliant. All right. Well, I think we're out of time. So thank you very much to the audience for your questions. Thank you very much to the panelists for this really interesting and informative session. And, I encourage everyone listening to kind of check Australia out and see what we're up to. Of course, we've done a lot around federal level, but of course, as Fiona said, there's a lot happening at the state level and lots of things to see. So thank you very much, George, for inviting us.
Can I just say one more quick thing?
Of course.
High resource. Patrick, I left that one open for you. Can I just suggest anyone who wants to know what's happening in Australia, have a look at the website. It's HY Resource. It's actually on the CSIRO website. So Patrick's just, he was just keeping it cool. But there's been a report that came out today, which is a sort of look back and, they are done every 6 months, but it's a really good snapshot of right now what we have. High Resource is the place to go. Please have a look.
Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you, guys.
Sorry.
If you do want to message any of the panelists and get any more information as well, you can do so through the Events Air app. But I just wanted to say thank you so much to Sarah for moderating the session. Thank you to Patrick and Fiona for joining us and sharing their insights. The next session is starting in just under 15 minutes. So please make sure that you log in for that. You can go into the main agenda and that will be available in 15 minutes. So once again, thank you to our panelists, and I will see you all very soon. Thanks very much.